There it is, and we are live. Hello, this is Maximus Confesses here. I'm here today with Ocean, who is a polytheist, and for today's show, we are going to discuss polytheism, and among other things, topics such as paganism and Wiccanism, and various other words that are associated. Ocean is going to be kind enough to help break those words down for us, and it'll be an interesting foray into a religious tradition many of us in the Great Debate community are not aware of. Ocean, thank you so much for being here.
Sure thing, dude.
Awesome. So the first question I have to ask you is, Ocean, how would you personally describe your own religious belief?
Damn it. Why do people ask that question? As far as my personal religious belief, I am what is called a, syncretic reconstructionist druid.
That's a lot of
So
words.
it's a lot of words. It really is. So I don't really introduce myself as that very often. It's more like, I'm a druid, and then, or a pagan, and then people kind of get the gist and they don't bother me anymore. But uh, to get technical with it, it's syncretic reconstructionist druid. The reconstructionist portion is that in order to learn about my religion, I go to archaeology, history, uh, ancient texts, and try and learn about what's called an orthopraxic way of worship. I'll get into that, what that word means later. Uh, and the syncretic portion is that I consider uh, a couple of different pantheons
Mm-hmm.
in my polytheistic faith. So there's the Celtic pantheon, which is somewhat known historically, and then there's the Nordic pantheon, which is better known historically, and the Greco-Roman pantheon, which is much more understood.
Mm-hmm.
And Druid uh, is an identification that I use that shows the focus on more of the Celtic side.
Interesting. And by orthopraxic, I take you to mean it's based around the right practice as
Yes.
opposed to the right belief. Orthopraxy means right practice,
Yes.
whereas orthodoxy means right beliefs or correct beliefs.
Yes. And like with a lot of pagans, uh, the belief doesn't necessarily matter as much. Like the gods to me could be symbolic entities, they could be real entities. Um, it doesn't it it doesn't affect how I practice my religion either way. I don't take a claim or a stake on either side of that. It's just that the stories and the symbolism within the religion works for me, and that's how I go about it. As far as orthopraxy is concerned, it's difficult to do, but it's a goal. It's the best way of putting it because there's not really much knowledge about what these people actually believed in or how they actually practiced. So, uh,
This is a very interesting way of looking at it because for many people in this great debate community, it's mostly about arriving at the correct beliefs. Atheists argue that the correct belief on God is that he either does not exist or his existence is unknown or unknowable. And the Christians or the more religiously inclined argue that God or the supernatural is something that can be known through a process of reasoning. Whereas for you, your practice-centric belief systems or your practice-centric worship is not really concerned so much with their existence.
right.
Mhm.
The existence I think is kind of a secondary note. If they do exist, then that's great. But I think that what matters, as far as I'm concerned, because the reason why I'm in this is more from a heritage standpoint and from the kind of chasing a feeling of home within spirituality. So through that journey, I've come to a Celtic, Nordic / Greco-Roman sort of belief system, and whether or not the entities are real isn't really a huge question to me. I came to the conclusion that is unknowable some time ago, and what matters to me more is the experience rather than whether or not I'm correct.
Cool. So, because there are so many possibilities in terms of which gods could exist and which gods couldn't, if there was an afterlife that had to manifest, considering that you have affinities for Celtic, Greco-Roman, and Norse mythologies. Which kind of afterlife would you most prefer?
It's I don't have an opinion on the afterlife. I've said this a couple of times. People get confused, but like say the popular Celtic idea is something called the Summerland or the Otherworld. There's Wiccans have the Summerland, and traditional Druids have the Otherworld, which is an idea that I kind of ascribe to. That it's just like there's a spiritual realm on the other side. Whether or not that counts as an afterlife is kind of up in the air. The Greco-Roman idea of the underworld is something that doesn't really appeal to me. Valhalla is cool, but like whatever. So I can take Valhalla or leave it. If it exists, great. If it doesn't exist, great. I'm probably not going there anyway because I'm not a soldier. So it's like the thing about Asatru is most people that I've met that are Asatru have military families or are military themselves. And that's because of the kind of the battle god setup of it. But anywho, as far as I think that the afterlife thing, because there's different afterlives in each of these traditions, it kind of goes into why three different fucking things. Because the way that I view that is that all the gods are possible, and all the gods have something to learn from. So. And from a historical perspective, this is something that people in antiquity did, was that they would, when they went to another land, they would give alms to other gods of that area. That's how they believed it functioned. So that's how I kind of take it, is that it's possible that there are multiple entities. I've been researching more into Cherokee entities, which would be more native to the area that I'm in, for example, of just, what should I give respect to these entities, should I not? And that's kind of a question I'm examining right now.
Cool. So, were you brought up in this kind of religious environment and background, or was this something you converted into?
Converted into it. I was raised Southern Baptist.
Interesting.
So
please describe that journey.
Let's go on a journey. It was an interesting little period. What I started out as like a very, very religious 6-year-old. That's when I got baptized, and after that, my family kind of moved. We switched churches. We went into this other church that had this kind of like culty leader that was also Southern Baptist, and then we got kicked out because my mom don't take shit. And from that we became Episcopalian, and from that I was kind of like a religious Christian that didn't show up at churches because churches frustrated me. I would read the Bible and think for myself, and a lot of churches don't like that. But yeah, and then I just kind of remained like I'm a Christian who doesn't go to church. After a while, like the whole structure of Christianity didn't stop making sense to me. It's this whole like God creating the universe with us in it, and the heaven and hell thing, like all of it added together, it just like I couldn't piece it together anymore. And regardless of how much I looked into the Bible, I tried to remain a Christian for as long as I could, just because that seemed right to me. It was really scary to leave that. But I had another experience while visiting Ireland and Scotland, and there was a few other things where the best way I can describe it is kind of as I introduced earlier, the feeling of home in certain places or in certain spiritual experiences. And I found that a lot of those experiences that I felt most home in were related to Druidic practices in pre-Roman Britain, or pre-Catholic Britain, rather. And that's kind of where my family hails from, is that area and Scandinavia. And making reference to those heritage reasons, that's where my family comes from, and that's kind of the old ways are calling, if so to speak. So I just followed that where it went.
Interesting. So from there, what is the difference between, let's say, paganism and polytheism? Are those words distinct? Do you kind of see them as synonymous?
Not all pagans are polytheists, and not all polytheists are pagan. Depending on how you define pagan. Zoroastrianism is sometimes considered polytheistic, sometimes considered monotheistic, and it's kind of a toss-up as to whether or not it's considered pagan. Also, when people say pagan, they're usually talking about a Eurocentric idea rather than a everything that's not Christianity idea.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people I know that are uh, Native American spiritualists that still consider themselves pagan, or vote in and consider themselves pagan, even though they're not Eurocentric beliefs. So it's kind of non-exclusive as to either term and how they relate. There are some religions that are polytheistic, and there are other religions that are considered pagan. But there are monotheistic pagans, and there are polytheistic religions that are not considered pagan by some people.
All right. So, and finally, how about the difference between Wicca and paganism? Is Wicca a form of paganism?
Yes, most by any term of pagan that I've been familiar with, Wicca gets included. Wicca is fairly recent, kind of combination of a number of things. I'm kind of biased when talking about Wicca because I'm a Reconstructionist, and there's a little bit of drama in the pagan community between Reconstructionists and uh, people that are more spiritualists, who wind up kind of following Wicca. The Reconstructionist position is that we should be looking at the ancient practices, giving respect to that, and trying to be as consistent as possible when trying to sort of recreate the religion in a modern time. Wiccans, from the Reconstructionist view, are kind of perverting that because they're borrowing from all kinds of ideas that feel interesting and feel spiritual, and help them find themselves, and view that as validation, whereas the Reconstructionists can get frustrated with that. But likewise, somebody who's a spiritualist can be like, I should be able, if this feels correct to me, I should be able to worship that. I should be able to chase this if I want to in this way that may not be considered right according to these ancient people you want to chase down.
There is a philosophical question that I am kind of interested in. The discipline of metaphysics concerns itself with what the nature of being is, what it means to, for example, exist. What is the most fundamental level of reality?
Oh shit.
So when you look at it from that kind of perspective, classical theists, such as myself, and many Christians follow into it, and they take after groups such as Aristotle and his school, and then of course in a lot of Neoplatonic schools, a notion that the divine is the most fundamental, something of a divine quality. Whereas if you look at other notions of the divine, there are metaphysicians such as Democritus and later Epicurus who were of the opinion that the gods were physical manifestations, no different from humans, except that they had much greater powers and abilities. So my question to you would be, which kind of camp would you fall more into if you had to have a conception of the gods? Would it be more of the Platonic Aristotelian idea, the classical theistic idea, which Christianity and a lot of other people followed, or would it be more akin to the Epicurean idea?
I think that there's something physical. I don't know if I can really kind of discuss the gods in terms of like what they are. It can get really confusing very quickly. I would say they're not physical, though. If they exist, let's assume for a second they're existing entities.
Right.
They would have to be something that's sort of supernatural outside the universe. Maybe they can interact with it, but uh, not something that we would be able to capture and put in a jar, for example. But like, as if you want to go like back really far, we can talk about like how the gods sort of relate to the universe according to kind of a classical belief, that the universe came out of chaos,
Hmm.
and chaos is this before time
It's
sort of
this.
massive
It's this very
contradiction, whatever.
it's
Yeah,
this very primordial matter.
right. Well, not even matter. It's I would the best way I would view it, or I could probably explain it, would be like a state of contradiction and incomprehension,
Hmm.
out of which order occasionally arranges itself. And I've got a couple of ideas about how that might have started or whatever. Um, One idea is that chaos sort of arranged the universe randomly at one point, and then time started at one point, quote unquote, and then the universe began, or maybe a god came out of chaos, and from that you had a sentient sort of being sort of creating order out of what was there. Both of these ideas are possible. Honestly, they kind of agree with Christianity to a certain extent. You could do that, and you could have that belief and be Christian, and that Yahweh kind of comes out of that.
This kind of reminds me a lot of Plato's demiurge, the one who takes this kind of chaos and fashions order from it, or even a being who emerges from the chaos and fashions kind of a materialistic realm.
Right. This is kind of with the Greco idea that like the classical Greek mythology has the origin being chaos, and then I think there's 3 gods that come out of it, and then the universe kind of comes into being, and then there's chaos births other gods that the other gods mate with, and so on. Like I think Gaia is one of the originating gods that comes out of chaos, or that is born out of one of the first gods. I think that it differs depending on who you read.
Right. I believe it's Gaia and Kronos, time and matter.
That could be one description. I'm not like strictly. There's a friend of mine who is like strictly Hellenismos, which would be the Greco belief system, and he's very serious about it. He would know like all the answers to this shit. Like he's very involved. But I'm more of the Celtic Nordic type, and this is one of those like things from Greek mythology that interests me, and that I sort of adopt, but I can take it or leave it at the same time.
Do you, as a Celtic Norse participant in paganism, partake in nature worship?
Nature worship. Well, there's kind of a respect for nature more so than a worship of it. There's a Celtic goddess named Morrigan who is the goddess of life, death, and nature. The celebration Samhain is a celebration kind of her and of the Dagda, which is the kind of the representation of humanity among the gods, kind of subjugation of her. And like the Samhain is kind of where we got Halloween, and it's very dangerous to go out during Samhain because that is when the Dagda has abandoned humanity and is out to subjugate nature to make sure that it doesn't come and destroy us. I think that kind of coming with, as somebody who ascribes to Celtic stories, has to have like a respect for Morrigan, and by a respect for Morrigan, a respect for nature as well, as she is nature's representative, and to respect her is to respect nature.
I see.
That's why a lot of us wind up being environmentalists. We're concerned about global warming and all that shit. We want to take care of the planet. It's here. We're here to we are its caretakers, and our interaction with Morrigan should be one that is very careful.
Is Morrigan, who, as a goddess, one who cares deeply for human beings as one important member of nature, or is she very indifferent towards us? Someone who has a begrudging relationship with us, one where she tolerates us so long as we are not inflicting our irresponsibility to nature, where we're polluting and damaging the environments.
It's weird as far as like, because as the stories as I'm familiar with them, the Dagda is more the representation of humanity, and the Morrigan is a representation of everything else. And that, like, as in being nature. So our relationship with the planet is kind of the Dagda's relationship with Morrigan, which should be one that is like it is one of subjugation, but it is also one that should be very careful, because she can destroy us very easily. And you can take that symbolically or literally. It doesn't really matter. If the planet overheats, we're done. For example. So, like, we are kind of part of nature, but we're also something separate. Just like Morrigan is a goddess and the Dagda is a god, but they're very different from each other.
Mm-hmm.
We represent something that is over nature, kind of. Like our interaction with nature is unlike any other being on the planet.
All right. So when it comes to nature and the environmentalism that's taken up by a lot of people within the pagan community, do you think that you guys make for terrific allies with other people who might have these concerns? Maybe, for example, Christians who are deeply environmentalistic, or other religions that might also have kind of an
It's
environmental bent?
weird. Sometimes the religion kind of gets in the way, because it's more with atheists than Christians, because we get kind of shrugged off as being crazy sometimes, but maybe we are, whatever. It's entirely possible. Uh, sorry.
Come on, I wouldn't interview crazy people on this show. At least yet. I might have the
I
Westboro
mean, according
Baptist Church.
to some atheists, you're just as crazy as I am. So what the
Yeah,
hell?
that's true.
Uh, but like the kind of the belief in God factor can present kind of a challenge for some people. But as far as like an alliance on the actual issue, we'll get along, and then the reason why comes up, and when it's a spiritual reason rather than practical reason, like the practical reason is there, but the source of it is the spiritual reason. There can be a minor disagreement, and sometimes that stops cooperation for some reason. I wish it didn't.
Are there disagreements on paganism, between pagans, that is, on things maybe like veganism and vegetarianism as it
Oh
relates
yeah,
to environmentalism?
dude, nothing is more scary than a pagan vegan.
Seriously.
Dude, like I'm a basically carnivorous pagan, so like I do get the occasional. I don't know, I've bumped into a couple of vegan pagans, and they're usually very outspoken about what everybody else is eating. Like, and that just kind of speaks like there's a ton of disagreements among pagans in general, and that's just kind of one of them.
Mhm.
And it just kind of comes with the bag of associating with a group that is more than one practice of belief. So, like, I'll show up at a pagan festival, and most people are Wiccans. There's a couple of Reconstructionists, and then there's some other spiritual practices that don't fall under Reconstructionism, that are, eclectic in nature in some way. And a common thing between the bunch of us is that we all, are really happy about nature, but there's different ways that manifests. And it's really interesting when you get like two people that worship the same God, that one God told one guy one thing, and the same God told another person one thing, and they get an argument over it. Like these kind of things happen at pagan gatherings. So
In terms of one of those events, have the two pagans just sat through, talked it out, and realized, okay, this guy's just fucking with both of us. God, in a monotheistic sense, might have to be all perfect and not contradict himself, but God's can
that's something that pagans don't. Yeah, we're not worried about that. Like the whereas Christianity has this like one all-knowing, all-powerful, benevolent, perfect God. In paganism, the gods might be tricksters. They might be. They're not wholly benevolent or malevolent. They, even the mean ones represent something. Morgan is, to take somebody we're already familiar with in this conversation as an example. She's a goddess of life and death. She takes away people's lives, according to the belief system. But she also is responsible for every birth. So there's good things and bad things that kind of come from the same entity in a lot of cases.
When it comes to your conception of nature, another question I have is it something that's egalitarian or more of a hierarchy? And by that I mean, are humans just one of many entities present in nature, or do you guys see humanity as having like the top role, whereas other animals kind of take a more bottom rung?
The way that I see it is that humanity is should be more responsible, because we're the ones that have kind of molded and created things out of nature. We use it. Most other critters don't really do that. There's like a couple of animals that use tools sometimes, but there's nothing that really compares to what we've done. So I think with that comes a responsibility, and that is not necessarily representative of an egalitarian approach between us and, say, crows. the difference in our minds by comparison to other animals gives us more responsibility as well as more ability.
I'm not sure you yourself are a meat-eating pagan. I don't think you made that clear in the interview.
Oh, I said carnivorous, dude. I eat meat.
Oh, right.
I am totally a roast beef sandwich eater.
Right. So, what is your kind of? Do you have a moral justification for eating meat then? Maybe as a human being, or do you think
Other
that?
than humans are naturally predatorial,
Mhm.
no. And I think that's all I need.
It
And
makes
there's some arguments about that with vegans, is that we don't have to do it anymore or something like that. And it's that as long as the balance in nature is respected, sure, I can eat meat. I actually prefer hunted food, for example.
So do I. Yeah, myself included. I mean, when it comes to game that you capture yourself, man, I don't know what it is, but lean meat is just really delicious.
Oh yeah, and grass-fed steak, for example. Like
Hmm.
when an animal is taken care of, meat tastes better. Like, it
That
just
is,
does. So
oh, completely agree.
yeah.
I mean, one thing that interested me when I was in the Middle East was the cows were a lot more delicious, but whenever I looked at them, they always seemed a lot more skinny than, kind of the media representations I get in the West. And I think there is something to that.
Yeah,
We don't pump ours full of hormones,
we do.
whereas we do.
But they're not as big on that.
All right. Now, when it comes to paganism, a lot of people will accuse the pagan community of being more susceptible to woo as opposed to people outside of it. Do you think this is true, or do you think that it's kind of overblown and exaggerated?
Um, I think that with the community as a whole, it's probably true.
Hmm.
Actually, it is true. I'll go ahead and say that. Like the community as a whole is susceptible to it. But when talking to individual pagans, um, there's some of us that are less susceptible to it, and there's some of us that are more. I've talked to people where in the pagan community where I'm just like, okay. Um, but there's other times where I meet somebody and it's just like, wow, you really thought this out. You're very well read. You're very well grounded. That's what I strive to be, but I don't, maybe. So I
Well,
come off as wooish to some people I know, and I come off as well read to others. So, um, but that's the kind of thing that I run into. It's usually it's funny because it's usually like the extreme one way or the other. There's somebody that's either very, very involved with the woo, or there's somebody that's either very, very involved with the kind of historical rebuilding of it.
well, I can definitely say as a Christian, we don't have crazy people in our camp.
No, none.
No, no, not whatsoever. So don't think I'm just asking this question to judge the pagan community.
Right,
It's
of
what
course.
a lot of people want to know. All right.
Especially among Catholics, none of them have ever been insane.
Oh no, none. There is, in terms of politics, are there pagans who can also be more susceptible to, let's say, leftist political movements and ideas and anarchy to the more extreme, especially those who might be interested in um, green anarchy or anarchy that is more about
More
being
about the environment.
anti-technology, yeah, and
Yeah.
being environmental.
Uh, in my experience, I've never seen a study on this, so I'm just going to be shooting from the hip as far as my anecdotal observations. From what I've seen, pagans mostly lean left,
Hmm.
but uh, I think that a lot of that has to do with trying to get away from Christianity. There's a lot of pagans that have had bad experiences with Christianity, and they don't want to be associated with anything that associates with Christianity.
Hmm.
Uh, Other pagans I've seen pagan libertarians, pagan conservatives. I was a pagan Republican for some time. I don't necessarily identify as that anymore, but um, I I tend to lean more right than most of my pagan counterparts.
Interesting. And also, is there any kind of, we talked about kind of buying into the woo. A lot of woo is also associated with a real distrust of technology and science in terms of it being an industrializing
Like,
force.
I guess homeopathy would be a good example, which is
Homeopathy would be,
in
yeah.
it's in the pagan community, and like skepticism of vaccines and that kind of thing. I've bumped into that a lot too. Both of which are positions I don't hold. very pro-vaccine. I don't think people should be forced to have them, but I do think that they're stupid if they don't. So there's my position on that.
So you take a libertarian stance then?
Yeah. I don't like the idea of the government forcing a medical practice on anybody, but at the same time, there is such a thing as herd immunity, and it's stupid not to participate in it. So, but I do think that people should have the freedom whether or not to be stupid. There are consequences to that freedom, but it should be preserved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that is something that pops up, and it's something I'm familiar with among pagans, that there is a skepticism of technology, and there's a certain kind of tribalism and primalism that is very present. Let's see. I would say, how can I word this? Basically, it's the idea that we didn't have vaccines in the old days, so we don't necessarily need them now, if that makes sense. Like, if humanity got along well without it, what people like that don't understand is that people were dying a lot from these diseases that we can prevent now through vaccines and through our medical technology. So like that comes with, because I'm a student of history, and being familiar with history, I'm also familiar with all the reasons why modern medicine is fantastic. Because there's a lot of crap. For example, they found there's a Viking dung that was found in Britain recently, and through the study of this dung, it became very obvious that what we would consider absolutely horrendously gross digestive system was actually fairly common among Vikings.
Wow.
Like, just diarrhea was normal.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness for
Stomach
industrialization then.
Whatever.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to paganism, you really have to look at the past, and that involves maybe in some sense idealizing it. Yeah, although even that's kind of present within Christianity, because Christians often look to Eden, which is this perfect natural being with God, and everything is perfect in that sense. Likewise, in paganism, there could also be kind of a reverence for nature that could border on the utopian. Do you think that's possible?
For Reconstructionists, there's a reference for pre-Roman civilizations. If you read the speech of Calgacus from the Picts when the Romans were invading, the Calgacus was a warlord that united a bunch of tribes to fight against the Romans at the Battle of Mons Gropus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And one of the things that he said about the Romans was that they consume everything. They consume the desert. They consume all of nature. They're destructive, and that we are the last free men of the world, so we must fight them. And the result of that battle was that he lost, but Tacitus recorded his speech, which he may or may not have made. It might have been something that was made up by Tacitus to criticize the Roman Empire. But I think that Tacitus, in ascribing it to Calgacus, probably was rightly ascribing an anti-Roman sentiment among the pagans of the time, or the Celtic pagans specifically, because Rome was pagan as well at that point, just a different kind. But there is a romanticization of that living with nature type of vantage point among pagans, among Celtic pagans especially.
Would you say your worship practices, yours particularly, are more individualistic, or do you participate with a much greater community?
Very individualistic. I've found two people that I more or less agree with, and only one other person that has beliefs similar enough to me that I might practice with, but I haven't done so. So my spiritual practices have been very solitary. It's a lonely existence being a pagan.
Oh.
As it's often said about pagans, if you get 10 of us in a room, you get 10 different religions. I've done group rituals before, but I don't really get anything out of it. At least not as much as I would get out of a solitary ritual. I was part of a Samhain ritual a couple of years ago that was mostly Wiccan, and it's the thing about group rituals is they're usually Wiccan. And I just didn't really get anything out of it. It seemed like I don't know, it didn't appeal to me, which is fine among pagans. Like, you can take it or leave it most of the time.
Have your religious beliefs brought you anywhere into the world? And
What do
like,
you mean?
oh, have you ever been on pilgrimage before?
Yes.
Where to?
Ireland, Scotland, both were kind of spiritual pilgrimages. I went to Ireland twice. One was was kind of the initial discovery, and the other was a pilgrimage. And then Scotland was a pilgrimage. I went to Iona, which is where Saint Columba was first converting pagans. And there's a on Iona, it's an island, and there's an abbey on there that still practices some very pagan-y sort of practices, like the laying of hands ritual is practiced there. Don't tell Holy Mother Church, please.
Don't worry, Holy Mother Church will never find out. I'll make sure of it.
Yeah, what's practiced there is Celtic Christianity, which is this kind of like offshoot of Christianity that kind of popped up in around 500 AD in that area. Roman Empire's falling and whatever, so there wasn't very much opportunity to enforce for the church to enforce up there. It wasn't until St. Patrick that things started changing. And even after that, really, before the Catholic Church really came in and made Ireland what it is today, which is very Catholic. Scotland and Ireland had this kind of weird Christianity. You'll see these like obelisks that are shaped like crosses in a lot of places that have this circle in the middle. And the cross was a representation of death, the circle a representation of life, and or the circle of life and rebirth. And it fit very nicely with the symbolism of the cross, and also related to the understanding of Morrigan.
Do you look to the Catholicization or the Christianization of Ireland, Scotland, the Celtic backyard, and see it as something of lament, or do you consider it in some other view?
The burning of documents I have an issue with. The destruction of a religion before it really had the opportunity to write a lot of the beliefs down is also something I take issue with as far as the Catholic Church is concerned. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the way that they did it also had moments of preservation. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where on the one hand, there is this elimination. On the other hand, there's a preservation of something as a snapshot, whereas if it had been left to be, it probably would have evolved quite differently than we understand it now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also lament the destruction of documents from both a historic perspective, because they are very valuable, mm-hmm. and also from a perspective of respecting another person's belief.
Catholicism wasn't the best at that in the like year 1000 on. But yeah, you know that. I don't need to get into an anti-Catholic rant, but especially since the Catholic Church is so chill now by comparison. But
it went through a kind of a period of humanization, and not to mention a lot of institutions were not particularly the best. I'm not excusing the Catholic Church by saying it. I'm just trying to put in just perspective. I mean, if people had Twitter in that day, to quote Donald Glover, who's a hilarious comedian, you'd be tweeting, "Oh shit, my village just got pillaged once more." Or
yeah, right.
Or, yeah, my life is over.
Hard to justify that kind of stuff after a point when you have everybody voicing themselves. But yeah, the destruction of documents isn't necessarily entirely the Catholics' fault. A lot of the valuable documents that would have related to the Celts were Roman writings that were eliminated just through the passage of time, or through the burning down of the Library of Alexandria, for example. It wasn't just a Catholic systematic destruction, although that existed. The writings of Pelagius, for example, would be valuable. It's invaluable to understanding the Celts, but we don't have access to that because we have access to like fragments and references and a couple of letters, I think, but not to his actual writings that probably had some ideas about the Celts and how he was approaching them.
Yeah, Pelagius, his documents were destroyed because of his heretical viewpoints on original sin. Just
Right.
put that into historic perspective.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because he was documenting about the pagans.
No, but as a consequence, like
Yeah.
the practice of the church eliminating that which they disagreed with is just one of many problems. So, like documents where we could learn from were burned for other reasons, and the practice of destroying documents wound up eliminating history from which we could learn from about these peoples. So the writing of somebody of Celtic descent practicing Christianity in his Celtic homeland would
It
have been
wasn't.
something that would be very eye-opening to historians about what these people actually practiced before he was there, because he probably would have written something about it, or at least his writings about his understandings of Christianity would have given suggestion as to what the pagans understood before he came to Christianity.
There is a very interesting point brought by um, a Yale legal thinker whose name is escaping me right now, but he actually pointed out something very interesting in the history of the Catholic Church. Rights were something that was given to the truth. In fact, one of the popular sayings was before Vatican I or II, I believe, only the truth has rights. It wasn't until later where they recognized that speech simpliciter is what deserves rights and protection, not necessarily
Right.
true speech. And that's
Yeah.
something that did come up in a lot of debate and scholastic effort and discussion. It was very recent,
Yeah. Unfortunately.
unfortunately.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
I know that there was a completely different attitude on what should be preserved at that point. Um, but it still doesn't absolve them from me, from my perspective.
no, no, I'm not trying to absolve them of
So,
anything. I'm just putting it into historical context.
oh, absolutely, yeah, that's fine.
And I just think that's important. Now, when it comes to maybe any personal changes, what has being a practicing pagan done for you in terms of building virtues and characteristics that you really appreciate about yourself?
Um, Definitely more independence as a person. I've noticed in myself after being a pagan. I watch after myself a little bit more. I've been in situations since uh, I don't know, since a long time ago. I had a really weird childhood where I had to look after myself. Um, and I think that a lot of that has kind of led to, the gods in paganism respect strength.
Hmm.
That's something that is a theme in Norse religion and in Celtic religion. That you don't love from the gods is not like freely given like in Christianity. It's something that's earned, or respect from them is something that's earned. And the way that that happens is through personal strength and personal reliability, as well as alms and offerings to them. But a big part of it for me, that is, as far as a personal change, has been that if I make a mistake, I own up to it. I take responsibility and I move forward to make any sort of changes. It's not there's a certain amount of passing along of burden, but it's very similar to the I think it's Aesop's fable about the guy with the wagon stuck in the mud. God doesn't help him until he gets out and pushes the wheel, and that's something that is big in paganism, I think.
By the way, the legal scholar I was thinking of was Robert P. George, and he kind of illustrated this in a talk he gave with a very popular Presbyterian pastor. That interview will be available for anyone who's interested in the description bar below.
Oh yeah, cool. I'll click that link.
Awesome. So, with that, I think this interview should be winding down to an end.
Sure.
Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I think we You asked a lot of questions that I don't usually get asked in these kind of situations. Like I told you before, I've been interviewed a couple of times, but um, as far as questions about my personal beliefs, you asked some things that offered some insight that I hadn't been, nobody else had really thought to get into, and I appreciate that.
Well, you're more than just a science project over here.
That's right. That's making reference to a comment I made earlier about I was someone's science project for a class assignment one time. I had to do. They were at a there's at a theocracy school, or yeah, not a theocracy. What the hell? Um,
Seminary?
some kind of seminary, and their project was to kind of meet and talk with somebody of a different faith, and I was their project.
All right. And thank you so much for being here. May God bless you. Of course, I'm speaking on behalf of the God who I believe in and worship, but take that as being me willing the best for you.
To throw in a response to that, the
Mhm.
pagan greeting and farewell is "Merry meet" and "Blessed be."
And that, my friends, is how you take on an ecumenical dialogue. Take care and peace out.